Casey started to continue down the hall when she caught sight of a familiar profile walking past the fence. Surprised, she stared as Coheed seemed to be nonchalantly striding past the churchyard. Like the other people, his head was down, but not because of the cold. Angels weren't affected by the weather. No, he had his hands tucked into his pants pockets, and he appeared to be in deep thought. He often bowed his head when he was contemplating something, but she was confused as to why he was out there in the first place, and walking. He stopped halfway from the corner, turned his back on the rectory, and looked down the street both ways before crossing over to where the shops were located. Again, his actions defied logic or reason. Since when did he observe oncoming traffic? The guy could pass through solid objects, the same way objects could pass through him. So far, everything he'd done was totally unlike him, leaving her more confused and curious as to what he was doing. Intent on watching him, she didn't notice the figure coming up from behind him until it was a few feet away. Stunned, Casey pressed her hands on the freezing cold glass pane as a thin wail emanated from her throat. The thing's head was nearly 3 feet high, bright yellow, and with earlobes that hung down past its shoulders. She didn't need to see the demon's face to know what it was or what its intent might be. "Coheed!" She banged on the glass with the flat of her hands. "Coheed, if you can hear me, watch out! Watch out! He's behind you! He's—" Still deep in thought, Coheed never saw the demon sneak up behind him until the thing raised its hands. Casey screamed another warning and tried to get the angel's attention by beating on the window with her fists. She knew she risked shattering the glass, but she didn't care. Fear fueled her desperation to caution him, but the wind outside prevented her from being heard. Petrified, she saw the demon bring its hands down on Coheed's shoulders. The angel's head snapped backwards as his knees buckled, and he dropped onto the sidewalk. "Coheed!" Her body jerked out of its temporary paralysis. Casey raced down the corridor looking for a way out when she saw a familiar green exit sign in the distance. Slamming down the aluminum bar, she opened the door to find herself in the garden courtyard. The wind hit her with its icy blasts as she tried to spot Coheed and the creature across the street. When she finally located them, the angel was hunched over, his hands over his head, as the demon pounded on Coheed's back. The cold was brutal, slicing through her and stiffening her in its wake. Putting her head down to keep the worst of it off her face, she tried to ignore it as she fought to get to Coheed. Yelling his name again, she ran to the fence. When she saw the simple gate at the end of the yard, she pushed up the simple U-shaped latch and the gate swung inward. The metal was so cold her flesh almost adhered to it. By now she could hear the heavy grunts coming from the demon as it continued its attack on Coheed. For the moment, her anger kept her warm, but she knew it wouldn't last long in this weather. The temperature was dropping fast. But if she could either distract the demon or pull him off of Coheed, she hoped it would give the angel enough of a chance to fight back. "Hey you! Jerk off!" She was nearly upon the demon, her fists raised above her head to bring down on the creature, when the thing stopped and whirled around. The sight of its face made her shriek in fear, but she was able to slam both hands into its chest. Her hands went through it as if it never existed. Stunned, she stared at the monstrosity grinning at her, when Coheed slowly rose to his feet and turned around to look at her. He also smiled, and then his face began to change, twisting and melting until it no longer resembled that of the man she loved. Too late, Casey realized she'd been duped. She tried to race back to the safety of the church's hallowed grounds when 2 pairs of hands grabbed her by the arms. A second later, the demon shrieked, releasing her. She tried to get away a second time when the demons threw their arms around her waist and legs and she was hoisted off her feet. Before she could fight them off or scream for help, a thick shroud of blackness wrapped around her face, cutting off all oxygen, sight, and sound. A moment later, she lost consciousness.